And welcome everybody. It's Monday, tax day in the US, the 15th of April. And we are in week 3, Monday Q&A, and I've got Rachel here with me. So seeing as Monday's Q&A, how's everything going with you in the course, Rachel? Anything coming up for you?
It's good, and maybe this isn't super relative to anyone else, but I actually was just going through last week's video, and just for MW purposes, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for good resources to learn about the business, like the three, not, how we have the 3-tiered system, but the other systems in other countries to kind of compare.
So yes, and if it's all right with you, in mid-course, we're going to start transitioning to the distribution, sales, and marketing end of things. So why don't we? I'll have to go through my stuff. Could I get you to post that on our discussion forum?
Sure.
That would be great. And then if I'll put some things in there. It's many times the simplest thing to do is Google the country and then find the legal body that's responsible for that country. That would be similar to the USTTB.
Right.
And we'll get an early start on that.
Okay.
Cool. And then the other thing is, I want to thank you for posting on the Facebook forum. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I actually wanted to call out on that, so I'm glad that you're on today. With all the stuff going on in France right now, what a mess. One of the things that I did want to kind of share with everybody is how to take certain issues and kind of break it out across a spectrum of things. And that would be looking at, what Deborah Myberg, my pal, posted here, and what they're doing to protect the vines with this inclement weather that's going through not only Chablis but Burgundy as well. In the master wine examination, the way this might get framed is what are the costs associated with I'm just going to make this up as I go. What are the costs associated with inclement weather in the vineyards? Okay, and you're aware of questions like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And these are called black hole questions, because people will jump immediately to sort of a way of thinking, if you will, that's very limiting in terms of writing a good essay. And for the rest of the class, it's not in the MW program. It's really worth taking a look at this and kind of how we're conditioned as wine people to think and respond to things and kind of put blinders on, right? So let's say that there was a question such as that in paper 4 of the examination, and where we kind of go is from a viticultural point of view, right? the way you looked at it and the kind of things that you've addressed are really good, especially because that that you're starting to note that aspersion is a has a lot of ramifications. Water is getting expensive, isn't it?
Right. Well, it's not, like I said, it's not even legal in the Russian River. I read this morning the fine is something like $10,000 if they catch you draining the river.
Exactly right. I had a house I was renting when my wife and I first got together, and I was renting a house in a vineyard in Rutherford, right off of Manley Lane, sort of catty corner to St. Supery, and it was a crotchety old viticulturalist who owned the property, and his son had built the house and then gotten divorced and didn't want to live in it. So I'm renting this house, and it had this beautiful rose garden out front. And I get my water bill one time. My water bill, this is about 1992, 91 probably. And my water bill was usually, I don't know, $40 or $50 or something like that. And my water bill is $1,300.
Wow.
And I called up Jack Neal, who was the guy who owned the vineyard. And I said, "Hey Jack, can we do a little bit of water diversion? I got a water bill. It's $1,300." He said, "Well, you know, I stopped by the other day and I saw the drip going pretty heavy on the roses out front." I said, "No." And what he had done is used city water for the vines, which is and he actually got tagged for it because obviously it was a little bit out of the norm.
Right.
And that's what I want really people to really think about, because the other thing that they're doing and used to do in Napa is, if you look at the videos of this and you see all these lights, they'll often pile up tires and burn tires in the vineyards for the warmth. They used to use oil burners that they would set out. And so one of the other costs is what it's doing to the environment. As you it pointed out in an excellent manner, that there are laws against a lot of the things that are the requirement to keep the vineyards productive and keep your business going. And if you don't, I think that in Beringer, when aspersion was the thing to do with the overhead sprinklings in whatever in the Napa Valley, Beringer used to use, and we're talking about the 1980s, for frost protection, Beringer would use as much water in a day as the city of San Francisco would use in a day.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, I mean, so the costs are enormous in terms of getting out in the vineyards, getting the materials, lighting the fires, trying to create some sort of heat inversion, spraying the buds with water and keeping them sprayed, so that you can save what ultimately might be your entire year's worth of revenue if you're a grower and that's what you do. And then the effects downstream, well, for the enormous losses that might be then incurred, and not only the loss of the immediate revenue, but also learn to think of what's the longer term loss, when you start to not be able to supply wine lists with the wine that you need to be sold, you know, through those restaurants. Have you ever worked in restaurants, Rachel?
Yeah, that's actually mainly what I do is work as a sommelier.
Oh, well, great. Yeah. So you know what it's like when the distributor comes in and says, well, you know, we don't have this Chablis or White Burgundy or Russian River Pinot Noir or whatever it is. You know, you start to get a little ticked off, you know, for having listed it and gone through all your end of the bargain, and now you don't have the product anymore. So
Right. I used to, this is a long time ago, but I used to work for an importer in New York, and they lost a 40-foot container of Prosecco because the refrigeration broke and all the bottles exploded. And although it was covered by insurance, they couldn't, it took them, I mean, basically they wound up losing money in the future because they lost so many placements. Because by the time another container got on the water, it was like a 4-month delay.
exactly right.
You could work 6 months to try to get a good Prosecco placement, but then there's 10 other brands that will come in and step in as soon as the restaurant can't get yours.
Yes, that's exactly right. So as we're going through this is the critical thinking and the digging deeper into topics that everybody, for whatever reason you're taking this course, I hope you really get a sense of these kind of ramifications and deeper thinking of certain, you know, aspects of production and decisions of how you're going to organize your production. We were talking about the alternating proprietorship, and when you go to a place where it works, it's just phenomenal. You got collaboration, you've got people working together, sharing, laughing, and it's pretty amazing. And you've got other alternating proprietorship facilities that's like a really bad dysfunctional family. People are screaming at each other and angry and upset and so on and so forth. So that's pretty cool. So what I wanted to do is also, since you had at least a question and have also posted on the discussion forum, anything else that up to what we've covered so far that needs clarification or you might want expansion on?
Nope, I think I'm good.
Okay, great. So Wednesday I mentioned that I would go through a little bit more of the details of how to put together your blending session. So I will do that. All right. So first of all, we've got the blending sheet and instructions. And I just want to go through this kind of step by step. So the way to set this up is to determine a category that you're going to make your wine in. And you can even do this with French or Australian or whatever. Obviously in the US it's much easier using US wines, but you kind of start with the process of what's called ideation, and we'll go through this more in the marketing portion of the program. But that is, what is it that we're going to make and why, and so on and so forth. So by going into a store and perusing the shelves, seeing what's there, maybe knowing a wine you're passionate about and that you want to emulate, or maybe that you want to compete against, is kind of a fun way to do this also. And you can do it with red, you can do it with white, and or a rosé if you prefer. And then what you do is you go in and you find some wines for the base wines that are roughly in the price per bottle that you're thinking of. So So if it's a $25 red wine, then that's going to be kind of your basis. If you want to see if you could make a lower price product in the $10 range. But even if you're doing a $25 wine, I highly recommend you throw some cheap stuff in there, okay? So you go out and you buy 6 bottles of wine and have some at your target price, and then some are lower and some are higher. And the reason for this is you're going to really be recreating a lot of the decision making that goes on in the winery when you're sourcing bulk wines, trying to make a blend, or working with your own material. Some of it might be more expensive, some of it less expensive. And that's going to then give you a range of both quality and pricing for the wines to go into your blend. Does that make sense from your end, Rachel?
Yep.
All right. And then, as I said, consider taking on different roles. If you're doing it with a couple people, have somebody be the winemaker, somebody be finance, somebody be sales and or marketing, that kind of stuff. Name your winery and the wine. And then as you're doing it, also consider what's our value proposition. Okay, we're going to make a $15 white blend, or we're going to make a rosé that sells for $9.99, or we're going to make our $25 red blend or $10 red blend or whatever. Start to then go through the process of, who are we going to sell this for? How are we going to market it? Why would somebody buy our product rather than the competition? Okay. So then you start going through and making tasting notes of each of the wines, and independently if you're doing this with a group. And then everybody starts to make up 100 milliliter trial blends. And you can be using any kind of measuring implements. You can have just, measuring cups out of the cupboard or whatever it is. And then start to go through the process. Okay, what did you come up with? What did you come up with? And then tasting the different trials, and then arguing about which is the better blend, okay? So on the blending sheet, we give you this area to make your random notes. So wine 1 or A, however you do it, and make your notes. Then what's your trial blend? And you might have several. And then we actually do this for a team building competition and a day-long workshop that's really, really fun. And then see if you can come up with your final blend, okay? As you're doing that then, well, let me just stop there. Does that all make sense from your end so far?
Yep, it looks good.
Okay, great. If you like, you can actually, as you're doing your trial blends, and this would be much more realistic, you or whoever takes on the CFO role can then also be putting some of these costs into the wine biz sim, into your calculator. All right. So remember that this is the blending workbook, and so when you're setting this up, you'll have your labels. All right. So just print this out, and then again, you don't have to put all the information in, but put that this is a Cabernet Sauvignon, and that it's whatever appellation it is, and the price per gallon that has been determined using this pricing model. Okay. So once you've bought your wine, I got ahead of myself. Once you bought your wine, then you take this information and then you put it over onto these labels, and then put these labels on the bottom. Now, is this something you're going to try to set up and do, Rachel? Because this isn't a requirement. This is
To be honest, I own a lot of wine, so I probably would just try to use my own.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I have a lot of wine that needs to be blended at some point anyway, so this is going to force me to do it.
Great. Fantastic. And if anybody's going out and buying it also, one of the things I like to do is I like to get a wine that's actually a higher quality up and artificially reduce the price so that you've got a ringer in there, something that's really good quality, but maybe a $6 a gallon. And, in people's minds, kind of creates a little bit of reality there too. Okay. All right. So, then you put your trials together. If the way that we do this for the blind tasting, if there's a team, multiple teams, we have each team submit their blend, and then everybody leaves the room. Then we set it up as a blind tasting and pour it. What you could do if you're doing a group of 2 or 3 or 4 of you, or even more, have everybody do up their trial blend and then play with it until each individual gets to a point that they like it. And then have each individual make up a little bit larger sample. And then you can have everybody leave the room, and then you can set it up as a blind tasting and have them back in, and then see who can be declared the winner, or which of the wines is the winning wine. Okay? So that's how it goes. It's pretty simple to do, but again, it'll get you thinking along the lines of how it goes in the real world, and especially when you have to start having the consideration of the costs involved. All right. The other thing I'd like everybody to do this week is to go to winebusiness.com and or Wine Industry Network, and go into their classifieds and play around a bit as we're doing this. This is a very tiny tip of the iceberg for what's out there in bulk wine, in grapes, and so forth. And this is actually a good time to also start to see what's going on with availability of grapes. But I'm going to start with the bulk wine. So I can go into the classifieds here, and they've got featured listings of people who want to pay a little more to get their product out there. And then you can kind of see, all right, if something is $18 a gallon, what does that roughly equate to in terms of what a wine would sell for on the shelf? And one of the ways to do that actually is facilitated by this little thing. So you can see if it's $22.50 a gallon, you're talking about, it'd be somewhere in the range of about $12, $13 a bottle. But the other thing you can do is you can just go in and play with your financials on the Wine Biz Sim and say, okay, if I could get Sonoma Mountain Syrah, and if it met, the quality level you were looking for, and also considering that this price is negotiable. If I were to go into this and put $17 a gallon and make this 100% of the wine, and go ahead and zero everything else out. All right. Then I can start to take a look at what would that sell for in terms of getting to a point of profitability. So because of what's available, I'd be able to make about 1,600 cases, I think. What was the availability on that? Let me go back and see here. And this is how I hope a number of you will use some of these workbooks. All right, we got 1,688 gallons. How many cases does 1,688 gallons make, Rachel? Any clue?
I don't know. I'd have to, I honestly, the gallons is really hard. I think more like in liters.
Oh, got it. Okay. So, so if I did 1,688 into gallons, excuse me, I would want to divide by 2.38. And let's see, I've got something you can't see in my way here. So that's going to be divided by 2.38. So that's going to be 709 cases. And where do you live again, Rachel?
In Oakland.
In Oakland. And where did you go to school? How did you get metrically?
I mean, it's from winemaking, because like I think of a barrel as like 225, and I don't know. I could just.
We perfect.
Really good. Talking gallons.
Yeah.
Until it's time to pay taxes.
Yeah, and it sure makes it easier in your head, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it's easier to calculate.
Yeah. So if you were to take $17 a gallon, convert that into how many cases it would produce, and then look at it with the standard FOB that's going to get it to this selling price of about $24. Your gross margin on that would be $35, $35,000. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how you can use the calculators to kind of do these kind of things for anybody who's interested. Then the other thing is you can start to think, well, who does this kind of thing? And that's where you can start to take a look at business models like Cameron Hughes and what he's doing. And how come I don't have the Cameron Hughes website? Thought I did. So I also at this point, and as we're starting to work into and transition into the sales, marketing, and distribution, let me stop that video because I think it's creating a bunch of lag for me. I guess they don't have a website that won't let you stop a video, for crying out loud. Jeez. But then think, as you're making your wine, this is exactly what Cameron Hughes and now his team of people are all doing to create their portfolio. And they're not using just the limited amount of wine. So I'm going to close that just because it's a pain in the neck. But they're not doing it with just the limited amount of wines. The limited amount of product that's available here. They are spending a huge amount of time sourcing the juice that's going to go into the wines that will then become their portfolio. And what they may find that they want to do is, let's say they try the Syrah and it's really great, but it's not enough to make a quantity that that fits into their needs for selling online and so forth. So maybe this now just becomes a blending component, and then they're constantly on the search. What else would we want to blend with that? And so then they may look for, if they wanted a Sonoma Mountain appellation, it really narrows what they've got available. If they want to expand that to a Sonoma County, or if they wanted to just put a California on it, and so forth. Then the next step from a business standpoint is the negotiation of what the final price is going to be, which, as I mentioned on Wednesday, can be completely different. And then notice here is a Columbia Valley, Washington, to kind of shift gears just to the kind of thing that you're going to find. So here's a red blend from Columbia Valley, and it's all ready to go, and almost makes you wonder what's wrong with it, right? So, but it'd be very interesting to get a sample of that to see if that would be something, because again, Cameron Hughes has established himself as a really talented at sourcing and blending and finishing the wines, and then he's put his time and effort and focus on the marketing and the sales end of it. Okay. All right. The other thing I'd love everybody to kind of explore, because we're into different production models and so forth, is naked wines. And I had mentioned this before, and Naked Wines has a really interesting, kind of a little bit dodgy, because they're asking you to put money potentially forward into an account, and then they're talking about angel investors and so on. So this is a great website to look at, and maybe even do a little background research, because you can find people that love or hate what these companies are doing. The one that I brought up is a friend of mine who does the Reverse Wine Snob, and is always looking for values, and he's obviously been a big fan of the Cameron Hughes model. So this week, along with the blending, take the time to look at alternative production models and how those start to then tie into the distribution and so forth that we go in. Are you familiar with Naked Wines at all, Rachel?
I've read about it a little bit, just how it's been very successful for a few different winemakers.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and they also they make a nice international case study, because they started in the UK. They started opening tasting rooms. They actually opened a tasting room in downtown Napa. I'm not sure if it's still in business. So they actually went the bricks and mortar route also. I think they've been trying a lot of different things just to see kind of what sticks and what doesn't. Okay, then the final thing to remember is in this, and you could probably have fun with this, Rachel, because you would have some stuff laying around. I've got little containers of Mega Purple and oak chips and different additives and all sorts of stuff, because remember that when you're working with material like this, and again, it could be that you're blending out of the material that you have in your own winery, and you come up and then you decide, well, you know what, a little bit more time in oak, or if we did this treatment to polish or to fine it or whatever, to take off an edge of bitterness, as long as the wine's not gone into the bottle yet, there are still additional treatments and steps that can be taken to finish the wine. And then don't forget that that's on, some of that, or at least, adding any additional cost in that would be appropriate as well. Okay. All right. Well, anything in general, Rachel?
No, I think I'm good.
All right, very good. Well, later I'm gonna actually, maybe I'll do this right now. You'll have to remind me to do this. You want to go through my MW mentoring introduction that I do with everybody that I mentor in the Master of Wine program?
Sure, because I don't interact with my mentor at all.
That happens too.
No.
I was assigned people that I never heard from, but
well, I met my mentor, and he told me that it appears to be that I'm doing just fine on my own. So
great.
Okay.
All right, good. And again, this will go back to something that I alluded to in the very beginning. Is when we talk about wine in the wine business, we become very myopic. It's not only wine; it's any area of expertise or complex consumer products, electronics, stereo systems, fashion, you name it. One of the things for the Master of Wine industry or for the Master of Wine examination is to break up this myopia. And so I actually found a question, and this is an actual examination question from some years ago, and it's why it, let's see, when is wine a match for food? So that's the question. And the first step that I recommend for anybody in the examination and when you're looking at topics, what's the real key critical word in that little question that really begs being defined? When is wine a match for food?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, what do they mean by match for food?
Exactly. And so in there is one word that cries out to be defined. What's the one word?
Match.
Got it. And how would you define the word match? Now I'm going to preface this just in general. Give up wine, take the blinders off. What does the word match mean?
Like your partner, the other half to one thing.
The other half to one thing. Great. What else?
Well, I mean, like an accompaniment or something that makes something better.
Okay. What else?
I don't know.
And I love doing this just because it makes people uncomfortable. So it's working. So remember, take your blinders off. Don't think about wine. What does the word match mean?
A match is the duplicate.
Got it. What else?
Well, there's like tennis match.
Oh, it's competition. Ooh, you're doing good. Usually I have to intervene all way before this. What else? Ride with it.
I mean, I think those are the main things. It's like it's either.
If you walked up to a person on the street and said, "What is a match?" what would they say?
Well, I think it has two major definitions. Either what we just said, that it's like, like a tennis match or a boxing match when two things come in opposition, or a match as like a noun as something that complements something else. So either in opposition or complements.
So there is a primary definition that if you ask non-wine people, they would say, and it's the number one actual definition for the word match.
Well, I mean, like Match.com, like your partner.
Right.
That's what I would think of first.
Let's see. I've got a candle here. And,
Oh, you mean like a matchstick?
Well, a match.
Yeah.
You got a match. Yeah. So it's, and this is the trick. What happens is when we think of wine, we narrow down options, we narrow down our thinking. And so there may be words that you actually, that wouldn't be appropriate in an answer, but they're just, when is wine a match for food is one of these, you've run into some of these damning questions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what happens is the examiners know why they're asking these questions. And so you could say that wine, a definition for match, let's just say it's an incendiary device of some sort, right?
Okay.
That used to light candles or joints or cigarettes or fires and whatever. So match could be a partner. It could be an accompaniment. You want the shoes to match the purse. It could be a duplicate. It could be a competition. It could be identical. It could be identical but opposite, like matching gloves, the thumb would be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's how actually easy it is to write a paper successfully for when is wine a match for food. It's highly dependent upon how one defines the word match. For example, wine and food can often be thought of a match as partners at the table. They're accompaniments, they go together. We talk about the marriage of wine and food in a partnership, blah, 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 right? You can write about that and do a paragraph. Could you write a paragraph about wine being an incendiary device?
Probably not.
No, I don't know if it provides a spark for conversation at the table and kind of provides warmth and that kind of stuff. I could probably write one. And are wine and food ever a competition?
Of course.
In many ways, and you could write a lot about that. And how they're identical. Wine is food, but
right.
And you've got to be really careful not to fall into the cliches, but that, it was an imperative part of the table. It was a safe form of hydration when there were very few safe things anybody could drink, and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's about 6 or 7 really solid definitions for the word match. And by just simply writing an introduction that says, when is wine a match for food is dependent upon that definition. You write a really good paper and you're done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this, and this is for you, Rachel, and for anybody who has an interest will do this, but when you and I talk individually, I want you to start to go through some of the questions that you've seen in your mock exams or for past exams that were a real problem for you.
Yeah, everything. I actually find the business questions in some ways to be the most challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I did a sample essay about, defining what are the metrics that you would say a brand is most successful. And I consulted my old college roommate who has an MBA from Wharton, and her definition of brand was not what they considered to be a definition of brand.
Ah.
Yeah.
That they who?
Well, when I had it marked and it came back to me, it was kind of like, we think you misunderstood the question. But it was like, really? Because I brainstormed it with my MBA friend who is an MBA in marketing.
Did you define the word brand in your introduction?
I did.
And how did you define it?
So according to her, the brand is something that's all of your intangible assets. So, like your reputation, like your followers, it's not your concrete like inventory or your building or your, it's everything intangible that all of your inventory, you still have your brand.
Got it. So yes, I can see where that got you into trouble.
Right.
And
she was saying in her line of work, she used to work for Kraft Foods and places like that, like, they're always measuring brand success, and it's difficult because it's not really, for them, it's not necessarily even tied into sales figures, because you could be having a poor year, but your brand could still be very strong.
Excellent. And by the way, I'm going to, do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say to the class that'll wrap up today. And before you go, I do want to emphasize, but you stay here, Rachel. I do want to emphasize, if you're watching this video, if you have questions, if things are if you're somewhere that you don't want to be in the class, or that you think you're missing something or whatever, let me know. And don't forget, on Mondays, you can email me questions that you want me to cover that are pertinent to where we are in the course, for me to cover on the Q&A night. Otherwise, I just have to kind of make things up, and I was really glad to have you in the Zoom room, Rachel. Okay. So, and then for anybody who's interested, I just want to talk about brands and branding in a different way that might be helpful. So for study purposes, and this is anybody in the WSET, this is people maybe in the Society of Wine Educators, a little bit less so in the Master Somm or Sommelier certification. See if you can start, if you haven't already, Rachel, a list of keywords that come up frequently that you're going to have on a note on your computer or your phone, or just written down in a book if you've got something you use to study, that are critical words that show up over and over, and brand is probably the #1 stumbling word in the Master of Wine examination.
Right.
All right. So, and here's the problem with the Wharton definition of a brand is a tangible thing, actually. So to start out to say that it's not gets you one foot in trouble. Do you know where the word brand comes from?
No.
Okay. It used to be an identifying mark that was burned into people or cattle or products to show association or ownership, some sort of an assignation of that symbolically, so that if you were a slave, you would be branded by the slave owner. If you were owned by the Circle K Ranch, or that's a fast food place, or a mini mart, but you'd brand the Circle K into your cattle, right, so that you could show ownership or association of that. If you look at the beautiful Bordeaux wooden boxes, in the end is branded a picture of the chateau or something symbolic, and the name Chateau Ducru Beaucaillou is a beautiful one. All right, but that's the brand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. so the brand actually can be something tangible in terms of graphics, artwork, a trademarked name, and that it's tangible enough that even in and of itself, it can have value and can be bought or sold on the market. People, I want to pick up this brand, or I want to get that trademark, or whatever. So then the intangible part is often spoke of as goodwill, which is the intangible things associated with the brand. So see if you can work on that, and then when you and I talk sometime over the course, probably of the next couple of weeks, if you'd like, we can kind of continue that discussion and see if you can come up with a list of words, maybe just a few, or maybe more than that if you like, that are really essential in the process that won't trip you up like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. This is just a paper that I've been lagging a little bit on. Like, I'm taking viticulture classes and know the winemaking. This is kind of the one, because to me it's less straightforward, that I'm kind of lagging. But I do have all of the essay questions from the past 15 years printed out.
That's great. Yeah. And basically what your friend from Wharton did was had, from her background and what she was taught, and what was probably, I'm sure she's a very successful person and very smart, and it was workable in the context of what she was doing.
Right. I guess the main point she was saying is that measuring brand strength is not at all the same thing as measuring your sales or your revenue. And that there's a really good argument to be made that there are a lot of products on the market that actually don't make much money but have incredibly strong brands. Right.
Yeah. And could you argue the counterpoint of that?
What do you mean?
That there are
selling a lot but doesn't have a very
selling a ton of stuff but don't have a good brand.
I don't know. What would you think is an example of something like that?
Well, in wine, oh God, the problems with getting old.
Well, I would say like all those like really cheap boxes that are still in the market, right? Like Franzia. I mean, that still sells a lot.
Well, but remember that that's a strong name association also.
Right.
So the Franzia brand over other box wines. So you can think categorically of certain things that might fit in. If you look at the top 5 or 10 U.S. wine producers, who do you come up with?
Well, when you mean like the companies like Gallo and
yeah,
Delicata, Constellation,
and I'm just going. Oh, that's the Worlds. I'm sorry. Let me see if they show up. Constellation. Are you familiar with the wine group?
Yes, they own a lot of cheap wine.
Got it. Are they successful?
Well, yeah, it looks like they're number 3.
Yeah. Do most people know about them?
No, I don't think they have the same recognition as the other ones.
Correct. So there would be an example.
Okay. So
I mean, Gallo's a household name, even if you know nothing about wine, you know and have heard of and maybe even have an opinion about Gallo.
Right.
Constellation a lot less, but they're also so diversified and they're global. And you ask anybody about the wine group and you'll probably hear crickets.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this very strategically as well. And so they just went a different route, that they're not doing things to promote the company as a brand. like Treasury or like other companies might.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is a critical thinking part. Whenever you get a chance, try to find as extreme an alternative as possible. And I'm going to give you a question to look up.
Okay.
And I also then want you to see if you can find for any given paper, you can also find the examiner's comments, right? I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want you to look in 1990.
Okay.
And there was a viticulture paper, and a pretty much verbatim to extract the best from a vineyard site. A modern viticulturalist or vineyard manager has to pay particular attention to vine spacing, trellising, and canopy management. Discuss.
Okay. I think using the word extract at the top is kind of a little bit sketchy. Because it begs the question. It's like, well, what are they? Well, first of all, I would define like, what do you mean by best? By best, are you looking at just yields and possible profits, or are you looking at like the best quality fruit? And I think even just putting the word extract there is like kind of like waving a red flag. Like, what are you asking me? Because that's almost like that's a winemaking term.
Well, and the thing is, it's a little bit of a diversion.
Right.
So
I'm just saying it's an interesting word to choose because
it is.
Can choose many other words other than extract.
Most people continually fail the examination because, number one, they don't pay deep enough attention to the question. And the reason your mentor said what they said is because you're already demonstrating to me that you are digging deeper than most people that are even well into this examination.
Okay.
But in the word that's really begging is best.
Right.
What do you mean best?
Right. Well, I would start by examining that word and like just what I just said. It's like, are you looking for best quality or are you looking for best money? Because there are probably ways that for any vineyard you can make a lot of money off the fruit, but not probably win any awards.
Right. So you and I are going to discuss this in detail at our next get together.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Sounds good.
All right. Good. Yeah, because and again, for anybody from the class that's still in here, learn this it's just a way of doing things. You know, people walk into wineries and it's the blah blah talking head. We do this, and you go, oh wow, and never think for a second, are they just blowing smoke up my dress or
probably
and you're right, probably. I mean, my job at Beringer was to write the words that Myra Nightingale, the winemaker emeritus, was supposed to say.
Right. Well, it reminds me, do you know Clos Sabone rosé, from Provence?
Which one?
The Clos Sabone.
Okay.
They released it a year late. It's a very distinct style, and like sommeliers love it because it has a year in neutral cask with a little bit of not very aggressive topping up, so it has a much rounder. It's very unusual, but it's a lovely wine. It's not a cheap Provence rosé, and I have a friend who's a young winemaker in California who might have been one of San Francisco Chronicle winemaker to watch recently. Who, when she was first getting started, she didn't have her licensing in order, but she made rosé. And so she realized that she was going to have to sell year-old rosé on the market. And, everyone here is clamoring for current vintage. So she released this really beautiful marketing about how she was so inspired by the wines of Clos Sabone. that she chose to vintage over her rosé for a year, which was like,
Yeah.
you didn't choose, like you weren't able to sell it legally last year, but it was very smart.
Yes. And this is, this is the modicum of cynicism that, and we need to have cynicism about the right things. I've got to temper this. I'm really cynical about the wine industry, but it's because I've been in it so long, and I know what's behind here. And sometimes the truth is so much more fun than the cliches and the BS. And that's what I'm cynical about is how far away from reality we've become. And if you've got 3 more minutes, I'll share with you my favorite marketing story in the wine industry and history. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Sebastiani used to make and may still make something called Rosa Gewürztraminer.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Let's see if they even make it. And I was having dinner with the winemaker, and I was curious about this thing called Rosa Gewürztraminer. Dang it. So the story was this was a solid rosé. This was before blush wine. And danged if it may be coming up with when pork was 27 cents a pound. But let me go ahead and stop the share on this. The wine was in this beautiful, elegant bottle, a very pretty label, and it sold really well. It actually became a national brand. And the story behind it was, well, Gewürztraminer has some degree of pigment. And so at Sebastiani, they decided to ferment their Gewürztraminer on the skins so that it would take up this pretty rosé color and highlight the fragrance and blah, 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 blah. Now, from what you know from Gewürztraminer, what would happen if you actually fermented Gewürztraminer on the skins?
Well, a lot of different things. The acidity would probably be terrible. It's not a high acid grape to begin with. And then you're going to pick up a lot of phenolic structure and probably lose all the aromatics that people like Gewürztraminer for in the first place. Yeah,
so you'd lose aromatics. It'd probably end up orange wine at best, right?
Yeah.
It'd be bitter as hell because of those phenolics and whatever, and you'd lose acidity. So I was having dinner with the winemaker from back, and this occurred in the early 1980s. I said, and we were drinking a lot, and that's always good. I said, what the hell, what's the real story behind the Rosa Gewürztraminer? He says, well, I was in my office one day, and one of my cellar guys came in and said, boss, we've got a big problem. And I said, what? And he said, well, we were moving the Cabernet, and it got hooked up to the wrong tank, and we put 1,000 gallons of Cabernet into 10,000 gallons of Gewürztraminer.
Right. Gewürztraminer.
Yeah. And it's like, oh no, And for those of you out there who don't make wine, you can't hit Control Z.
Right.
And so they now they've got a lot of it. So they built it up to, in the 80s, over 100,000 cases a year with the story, and put it in a special bottle, charged a premium for it, and made it for probably a couple decades.
I know. I just often think that, like, I mean, I'm getting more cynical, especially when you start making wine, because you start to see like what, you know, what people spend money on is like so uncoupled from quality and so like so much more tied into like the brand imagery, or just like, you know, buying into something that's not
Uncoupled from whose idea of quality?
our idea.
The expert opinion.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, all you have to do is look at Meiomi. That's a strong brand. Would you agree?
Yes.
And what do the critics and what do we, not me actually, but what do most wine insiders think of it?
Well, we actually at my tasting group yesterday, we were talking about this because I also have a sommelier background and I've gone through the core on the website, you know, Guild Somm. They have these producer profiles, which I think are ridiculous. So they have for all the classic regions, they've created profiles for their top 20 producers, and then members on the site can vote them up or vote them down. And it's fascinating to look at, because I was laughing because Domaine de la Côte is like number 3 or 4 now. And every time I've had that wine blind, I think it's terrible, but it's like, it's Raj Par's wine. So of course it's number 3 or 4. And I was going to comment on that, on the California Pinot Noir page. I was like, wow, it's interesting that you don't even have Meiomi listed in your top 20 producers, because they're the number one selling Pinot Noir in the entire world. But
yeah,
of course it's not on that page. And, you know, number 1 is like, I don't know, something like Anthill Farms and like Domaine de la Côte and Pay, which are brands that like nobody even like knows outside the United States. You know, I'm really not even outside of California and New York. But yeah, I agree.
And again, this is the kind of juxtaposition in your papers that you could apply to questions about fruit and fruit quality and viticulture and so forth, that you could apply to winemaking decisions and so forth. And you know, it's like the wine industry. To me, the wine insiders have just gone crazy. We'll get into my views on wine and food pairing later, but we're out of control, and we're totally disconnected. And not only, even worse, we're making fun of the lifeblood of any business, which is the consumers. And we're doing it from a relatively ignorant. I mean, the number 1 diss against Meiomi is, I don't know, what's the residual sugar in it, like 0.8 or 0.9 or something like that?
It's 14.
14?
I asked, because I asked because we were talking yesterday in our tasting group that it was just kind of shocking that the wine's not ever been on an exam. And I was like, it's going to be on this year or next year because it's a Constellation brand. And a couple of the people in the group said that they had run it through a FOS machine. And I believe, maybe it wasn't that high. It was more than, I wrote it down. It was at least 8 or 9 grams per liter.
8 or 9 grams per liter is about what I was thinking. Yeah. So 0.8, 0.9% residual. Yeah. And that's one of the things that, you know, that and Rombauer, oh my God, and whatever. But have you ever had 47 Cheval Blanc?
No, but I heard your example. I think it's very sweet.
Yeah. I mean, if you've ever had an authentic one, you'll never forget it. And you'll never forget it really does taste like port, because it's also really sweet.
I mean, I think the offensive thing about Meiomi, that anyone who's not even a super expert, even someone who's just out of entry-level drinking, would agree, it doesn't really even taste like Pinot Noir.
So,
do you know what I mean?
It does and everything else doesn't. But imagine also what, you know, now to satisfy here's a great technical question. How do you source the grapes, the bulk wine? How do you source for that level of quantity, and how do you manage that? That's a really big one. Do you know Olga Crawford? Have you run into Olga?
Not yet. I think she's hosting our group. She's hosting the bottles in a couple of weeks.
Oh, good. Excellent, excellent. Well, I was her mentor. When she was the white winemaker for Gallo Sonoma.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when I was living in Napa, and we had her. She and Chris Ogenfuss were both my mentees, and Olga had to cancel one night because she had a little problem with, I think it was 2.5 million gallons of Chardonnay.
Crazy.
that had to be corrected. It's like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no, we went, so we early, back in January, they actually, it was fascinating. We had a 2-day trip to Gallo in Modesto. And we spent the first day, a student trip. So the first day was with, in their offices with, directors of viticulture and winemaking and some of the business people. And then the second day we went out to the facility in Livingston, which is the biggest winery in the world. And they were very open because I asked, I was like, this is, how do you make a Pinot Noir that's $9 a bottle? And I was like, how much Pinot Noir was in it? And he said, exactly 75%.
Yep.
Exactly. He's like, we know how much is in it. And it's a struggle, and they were talking about how hard rosé was for them because they saw that rosé was exploding and they just didn't have enough grapes for it. So they had to divert, things like Grenache. And so it was interesting. The head of red wine making was complaining that, those years, 2 or 3 years ago, were really hard because a lot of his grapes were being funneled off into rosé programs. So then he was scrambling things to put in their blends.
Yeah. I mean, in that kind of competition, when another category starts to come out like that, right? And then all of a sudden has other people scrambling, you never think there would be any kind of effect in that, that kind of thing. Yeah. And people also, a lot of people just don't know how many really passionate, really smart people work at Meiomi and Gallo and these companies, So,
yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, they have their own problems that are so unique and that things that we don't really think about when you're able to work on a small scale.
Right. Well, and then here's how the cliches and the BS come in. What's the legal percentage of Pinot Noir that needs to go into Chambolle Musigny or into Musigny itself?
Well, 100, no? Really?
Mm-mm.
What is it?
It's 85%.
Yeah, but there's no other grapes that are authorized to be planted.
And they're in the vineyard. Pinot Blanc and Chardonnay, and Pinot Gris.
Okay.
And there's Musigny Blanc because it used to be added usually when it was botrytis to actually sweeten it a bit and to increase the alcohol.
Right.
And the wines were barely, if you have wines, from before the 60s and before, you'll see the color on some of them are just so incredibly light, and they're allowed to add 15% white varieties.
But how many people are actually doing that?
Not now, because the change in preferences and the requirements for color. Remember the cold soaking and whatever was the Akkad method years and years ago, and caused an uproar. What's this Lebanese winemaker telling Burgundians how to make wine? And it's now the standard of today. But back when that was happening, it was a travesty. Oh. And again, it was to saturate color and get more color because that's what the market was demanding. So, yeah. All right. Well, there we go. Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
All right, fantastic. Let's set up a call maybe next week if you want. We can work on a couple of papers and stuff. And
okay. Yeah, I think I just need to go through all the essays and write out the words and kind of the areas of focus.
Yeah, and see if you can, and with all the people that I work with, I just work on how to deconstruct the question, how to constantly make sure that throughout your outline and throughout the paper, you're not going off track.
Right.
And so if you want to take this one about to extract the best from a vineyard and just write a real simple outline,
Right.
almost like what we did with when's wine a match for food.
Right. Yeah.
And then we can discuss it, and it makes a really good example of how they'll establish the structure of the paper is inherent is actually in the question.
Right.
So, okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, great.
All right.
And for anybody else who stayed on this, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks.